In the early hours of Wednesday the 14th of June, a simple house fire caused by a faulty fridge freezer in a flat in Grenfell Tower, a 24-storey block of social housing flats in West London, quickly became an unimaginable horror. At least 80 people were killed in the blaze that destroyed 151 homes and took more than 24 hours to get under control, as the BBC reports. The fire, which Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell has called social murder, according to Sky News, could and should have been prevented. In the days and weeks that have followed, survivors, local residents and housing activists have called for justice for Grenfell and demanded accountability. They are furious that profits have been put before people's lives in the richest borough in the UK, as one resident is quoted by ITV. Criticism has been directed not just to those in charge of managing Grenfell Tower and the austerity policies of the government, but also to the mainstream media. Grenfell Tower cladding that may have led to fire was chosen to improve appearance of Kensington block of flats, reads the headline of a piece in The Independent. Which gets to the crux of one of the major issues. Grenfell Tower had been refurbished in 2014 when cladding was added, which, as the Independent piece reports, was chosen in part so that the tower would look better when seen from the conservation areas and luxury flats that surround North Kensington, according to planning documents. Not only that, but as the Times piece, Grenfell Tower, fire-resistant cladding is just £5,000 more expensive, makes clear a cheaper, flammable material was used in order to save money. And the Guardian piece, Grenfell Tower fire, police considering manslaughter charges, reports that the insulation and cladding tiles at the building had failed safety tests. While those facts alone paint a picture of gross negligence and disregard for the safety of the residents of Grenfell Tower, they're only half the story. Residents raised multiple concerns about the risk of fire in the months before the fatal blaze, but were brushed away by the council's tenant management organisation, The Guardian reports. A residents' group blogging as Grenfell Action Group voiced fire safety concerns. In a post from the 5th of March 2013, after a spate of power surges in the tower, they wrote, "There is something seriously wrong with a bureaucracy that is incapable of reacting to serious negligence affecting fire safety in a densely occupied tower block with any sense of urgency. Does anyone actually give a damn?" In another, from November 2016, they wrote, "Only a catastrophic event will expose the ineptitude and incompetence of our landlord, the Kensington and Chelsea Tenant Management Organisation. It won't be long before the words of this blog come back to haunt the KCTMO management, and we will do everything in our power to ensure that those in authority know how long and how appallingly our landlord has ignored their responsibility to ensure the health and safety of their tenants and leaseholders." Presenter Jon Snow, confronted by angry group over Grenfell Tower coverage, reads this Telegraph headline. The article reports that there was anger at the lack of media coverage about residents' concerns on fire safety in the building before the disaster. And it includes a video of one man shouting at Snow,
"You didn't come here when people were telling you that the building was unsafe. That is not newsworthy. You come here when people die. Why?
A different clip, filmed by the BBC, shows a journalist attempting to interview a protester at Kensington and Chelsea Town Hall about why people are so angry.
Well, why don't you tell me why they're so angry? What do you think the reason is?
Well,
no, I'm asking you.
You're angry, right?
What's the reason? Why do you think these people are here? You've seen the news for the last few days. Why don't you answer my question?
What is your message to the
question.
council?
And residents were angry with the media not just for failing to pay attention to their concerns over fire safety before the fire, but because of their behaviour in its aftermath too. As The Guardian reports in its piece, locals' anger and frustration spills out after Grenfell Tower fire. A journalist tried to film a distraught woman in the crowd. Some men moved to protect the woman, and within seconds a large contingent of police officers were jostling with the crowd amid shouting and screaming. One onlooker said the police and media were acting insensitively towards people whose loved ones were missing. Officially, 80 people are currently presumed dead, though residents and locals have repeatedly insisted that the toll must be higher given the number of people missing, and as the BBC goes on to acknowledge in its piece, no final Grenfell Tower death toll this year, police say, have created their own databases of missing people with figures which differ from those officially released. BuzzFeed reports that the refusal to even publish an estimate was making people fear a cover-up. A number of think pieces emerged, putting the fire in the context of the decline in local journalism. One piece titled, "Grenfell reflects the accountability vacuum left by crumbling local press." Another, "Grenfell survivors blame mainstream media, how do we overcome mistrust?" reports that the media have failed communities like those in inner-city tower blocks such as Grenfell, most obviously by ceasing to exist. The dwindling local press, as others have pointed out, has created a gaping accountability hole for which there is currently zero substitute. But the same piece also refers to a resident who was filmed telling a reporter,
"You, the media, you would be held hostage. You are the ones who facilitate this. You are the mouthpiece of this government. You are the people who make this possible. You are the ones who validate it. You are just as culpable as this government."
Suggesting that this is more than just a matter of feet on the ground. This is a political criticism. As Suzanne Moore points out in her piece, "Grenfell is political, the right can't make that fact go away," the multiple and complex causes of this fire, economic, cultural, and racial, were immediately understood. After all, the lives of the poor, mostly ethnic minority residents of Grenfell Tower were ignored for a saving of £5,000 in a cosmetic renovation that didn't even include sprinklers or fire alarms in their homes. Dawn Foster outlines in her piece for the New York Times, racial politics are the key to understanding the Grenfell Tower fire. The answer to the question of her article, titled, "Would a white British community have burned in Grenfell Tower?" It's difficult to imagine. Grenfell Tower stands in the richest borough in Britain, one of the richest countries in the world, where house prices on the private market are astronomical. If someone in those houses complained about their rubbish bins, the council would sort it out immediately, one Grenfell resident told Dawn Foster. But because we weren't white, no one cared when they said their homes were dangerous. Sections of the British media have openly and committedly played a leading role in demonising people of colour in Britain for decades, and Grenfell Tower was no exception. The Daily Mail published a number of photos of the man they seemed to deem responsible for the fire. Not Nicholas Paget Brown, the leader of the council, or Robert Black, the head of the management company that ran Grenfell Tower, nor the manufacturers of the flammable cladding, but the resident in whose flat the fire started, prompting 1,300 complaints to the press watchdog. And of course, the Daily Mail is not alone. When Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell used the phrase social murder to describe the willful negligence that resulted in the dozens of preventable deaths, The Sun chose not to assess which political decisions could be said to have contributed to such a result. They chose not to interview the 60 companies who made money from the refurbishment, but focused on McDonnell's refusal to apologise. McDonnell's comments were, however, reiterated on the comment pages of The Guardian by Adichie Chakraborty. In Over 170 years after Engels, who coined the phrase social murder, Britain is still a country that murders its poor. He writes, "When 4 separate government ministers are warned that Grenfell and other high-rises are a serious fire risk, then an inferno isn't unfortunate, it is inevitable. Those dozens of Grenfell residents didn't die, they were killed. What happened last week wasn't a terrible tragedy or some other studio sofa platitude, it was social murder. And when Grenfell is by far the starkest and most unforgettable social violence in a generation, it's also inseparable from the last decade of austerity, what Chakraborty calls a decade of social violence." As the Washington Post piece, Britain's housing crisis looms large as Grenfell fire survivors reckon with what next, makes clear. The neglect of the Grenfell residents and their thousands of counterparts across the UK did not end when the fire was put out. Having been promised permanent rehousing in the borough within 3 weeks, many of the Grenfell fire's survivors remain in temporary accommodation with little clue as to what faces them. As The Independent reports, on the 5th of July, in Grenfell Tower survivors still living in hotels, despite government promise to rehouse everyone by today, some have been offered new accommodation with rent up to triple the amount they paid before. And hundreds of flats in the estate surrounding Grenfell Tower are still without basic amenities after the fire destroyed centralised gas and water lines under the building. Austerity measures have also affected another sector directly related to the Grenfell fire, the emergency services, which have had to deal with budget cuts since 2010. The New Statesman reports that there are nearly 7,000 fewer firefighters in England than 5 years ago, leading to longer response times and a 25% fall in the number of fire prevention visits. In response to the Grenfell tragedy, the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn proposed an amendment to the government programme outlined in the Queen's speech that would end the cuts and also lift the public sector pay cap to give public service workers a wage increase, according to The Independent. The amendment was blocked by the Conservatives, who cheered when the votes were counted, The Guardian reports. One positive noted by many in the aftermath of Grenfell was the huge outpouring of empathy and solidarity from the public towards the residents and survivors. As the Metro reports, people have been so kind after Grenfell Tower, many centres inundated with donations. There have been fundraising concerts and numerous protests. Many people are wondering now how they can help in the fight for justice, not only for the victims of the fire, but for those residing in tower blocks that have since failed fire safety checks and the hundreds of thousands living in temporary accommodation at the sharp end of the housing crisis. Dawn Foster advises, providing scrutiny of local and national decisions on housing is one way you can help people in housing need and ensure that your actions will keep up the pressure and hopefully help prevent more tragedies, evictions and injustices. Because Grenfell was preventable, and alongside justice for the victims, we must also make sure that there are no victims like them ever again.